Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Just have a sip of tea. My name's Shawn. Welcome to Deep Heart Orthodox. And today, it's actually my first video, so congratulations to me. Pat on the shoulder. I'm going to talk about my journey from Judaism to Orthodox Christianity. It's a big story. Lots going on in there. Intense at times, very intense. And this is part one. I'm going to do a couple of other videos, but today is really the personal side of the journey, and it's really it's Kai's story. It's my son. My son Kai has a big role to play in this story. And here you can see a couple of photos of what you're going to see along the way in the journey. And I just wanted to, before I start on the story of my journey from Judaism to Orthodoxy, I just want to talk about Deep Heart Orthodox. I intend on making this, doing some more videos. Obviously, I'll be talking about my journey to Orthodoxy. I'll do a couple of other videos there. I'm very interested in developing an Orthodox Lectio Divina, and that's a meditative approach to Scripture. I think we are sometimes conflicted about how to approach Scripture, and we kind of study it as if it's an academic issue. But in the Eastern Church, as well as in the Latin Church, there's this tradition of Lectio Divina, and I'd like to explore that with you. Judaism and Orthodoxy, obviously the connections, the similarities, but also the boundaries and the differences are really important for me for personal reasons, but also intellectually and spiritually. I'm really interested in that. I lived in Israel for a number of years, so the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is something that I've grown with over the years, and I've had to deepen my understanding of it. We'll be doing some talks on that. Right now, a lot of people are interested in end times, and I think there's a lot of stuff in the news about it, and so maybe we'll talk about, what is legitimate and what is how we should approach these things as Orthodox Christians. Obviously, theology, patristics, church history, and finally the topic of women in the church. And I think that that's a really a hot button topic. A lot of people are talking about women deacons in the church. I think there was a woman who was just ordained in Africa in the Orthodox Church. So we'll be talking about these issues as well. Parts 2 and 3, what I'm referring to there are parts 2 and 3 of this story, my journey into Orthodoxy. So part 2 will be about childhood cancer and the problem of evil, and approaching it from a theological perspective, raising the issue of theodicy. Why would a good and loving God allow a child to get cancer? And so that'll be an intense one as well, but we'll do that. I'm still putting that one together. And then I also want to talk about why I ended up in the Orthodox Church. What was it about Orthodoxy specifically, in contrast to Eastern Catholicism, which I was involved with for a number of years, Roman Catholicism, the Protestant churches, and maybe some other religious traditions, contrasting Orthodoxy to Buddhism, Islam, and maybe even the shamanic traditions that I was involved with for a while. So I'll talk about some of these other religious and spiritual traditions that came into my life, and I have some good things to say about them too. I'm not one of these kind of like, get rid of them, it's all pagan idolatry and devil worship. I do think that there are some beautiful aspects of other traditions, and I've ended up in Orthodoxy not so much because, I do believe it's the truth, but also because I just feel at home here. This is where I'm supposed to be. Okay. Without further ado, we will, one more mention I want to make, a couple of slides before I start my personal story. So one reason that I'm involved in Orthodoxy is because it's just growing, and it's exciting to be part of a church that is growing so much. Here you can see on the left a photo of me and Father Ted on the day 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago now, that I was chrismated and brought into the Orthodox Church. Father Ted was then the pastor of a church in the west end of Toronto called St. Constantine and Helen, a beautiful community. And then he was moved to Prophet Elias. So at Prophet Elias, at Christmas, last Christmas, we baptized 5 people. You can see that in the upper photo in the middle there. I'm in the photo on the left there, standing on the left, and David, one of my godsons, is there, and he comes from a Pentecostal background. There was a Muslim and a Hindu who were getting baptized on that day. We're bringing people in from all sorts of backgrounds. In the photo on the right was just taken on Holy Saturday of 2024. Just a few about just over a month ago now, and there was a whole family being baptized. You can see Dad is in the baptismal font with Mom and baby are standing behind there, and there are 13 other people coming again from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life. In the middle photo on the bottom there, you can see my friend James. It was so wonderful to see him come in. We've been friends for a couple of years now, and James comes from a regular secular Canadian background. And decided to join the Orthodox Church. One of my other godsons is there, Francesco, and it's wonderful to see him in the photo. His candle's being lit by Father Ted there, and it was really wonderful to stand with him on this day. And what was really also wonderful was to have so many people come to the church on Holy Saturday. Maybe, and I was sitting in the pews, and there was an elderly, a Greek couple who go to Prophet Elias, and they were saying to me they've never seen a baptism of adults before. And it was just, I could see how moved they were, that people are coming to their church. And it's like, yeah, you guys have something really special. We love being a part of it. I'll just make a plug for Father Ted. If you don't know him, I actually met Father Ted not initially as a pastor and a priest of a congregation, but he was a professor down at the University of Toronto and was taking some theology courses there. And I met him there. I thought he was a great guy. We actually studied parts of Orthodox psychotherapy together in his, it was a pastoral course he was giving. And then I realized when I was searching for Orthodoxy, St. Constantine and Helen is really not far from where I live. So I ended up going there and realizing he was the pastor. So it was great. I started going to Vespers and checking out the liturgies, and it was really wonderful. So check out his YouTube channel if you're not familiar with it. It's Father Ted Talks, and he talks about all sorts of issues related to Orthodoxy and coming into the Orthodox Church and how to behave at church, and all sorts of really interesting talks. So that's Father Ted Talks on YouTube. Okay, one more mention I want to make of Father James Bernstein, who I've never met Father James, but I feel like he's a mentor and a brother in Christ, because we both come from a Jewish background. And Father James, his biography, if you haven't read it, Surprised by Christ, is a really great story of coming to know Christ and the journey that many of us go through, which is in stages at times, right? We're all looking for the truth, and we go in one direction, then come to another direction. And Father James recently was on YouTube and announced that he had cancer. And so please, he's nearing the end of his life, and we pray that he have a peaceful Christian end to his life, and that he go visit Jesus, right? Go to sleep in the Lord peacefully, and we're praying for him and his family at this time. So thank you, Father James, for everything you've done to pave the way for more of the Jewish people to join the Orthodox Church. So here we go with my conversion story. I'm going to start with this picture of my family growing up. The large photo there of the elderly couple, that's my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, my Bubby and Zadie. We call them Bubby and Zadie. And my Bubby Rose, and so these are my mom's parents, my maternal grandparents. My paternal grandparents, I don't have a photo of them here. I should have brought one as well. But my other grandmother, my Bubby Gert, was also born in Toronto, like Bubby Rose. So, we are now, I'm a third generation Canadian. My kids soon in the family will start being grandparents here. So our family's been in Toronto for a long time. So Bubby Rose, even though she was born in Toronto, we used to go to their place, and you can see I brought the pictures of food, right? So, cabbage rolls, pierogies. right now I'm calling them pierogies, but we called them kreplach growing up, and we put them in our soup. My Zadie Mac didn't, he wasn't born in Toronto, but he came as a child. And the map there is a map of Eastern Europe. So there's a fire truck going by outside. Is a map of Eastern Europe and Belarus. So he was born in a town called Rechica, which is just a few kilometers north of the Ukrainian border. So we do have part of the family we know, actually the whole family comes from Eastern Europe. We don't know. I need to do more research with my Bubby Rose's side of the family to see if anybody knows exactly where they came from. My dad's side of the family, my grandfather, John, came when he was a baby, and we really don't know where they were from either. Eastern Europe, Austro-Hungary, right? Like that's what you hear, but we don't know, other than my Zadie Max, we don't know where the rest of the family came from. But we all grew up here in Toronto, going to my Bubby and Zadie's house on Friday night for Shabbat dinner. And my grandmother with my mom, and then my sisters would join them, lighting Shabbat candles and having the challah, and my Zadie saying kiddush, bread and wine, the symbolism, bread, wine, and candles, right? Welcome to the Orthodox Church. The Shabbat dinners were preparing me for Orthodoxy. It was a prefiguration of things to come. And the other photo, the last photo I'll talk about is my family. So my parents are in there. My daughter is in the middle of the photo. Coco is there. My two sisters are on either side of my daughter. My mom's head is kind of sticking in the back there. And then my two nieces and my brother-in-law, Rick, is there. This was an event that took place at my daughter's school about a year ago. She's in high school now. And I brought this photo into, it's a newer photo, and I wanted to show that, I still do have a really good relationship with my family. We go to my mom's. My grandparents are gone now, but we go to my parents for Shabbat dinner. No, I'm not practicing two religions, and I'm not a Judaizer, and so just like calm down. We have a good relationship with my parents. Sometimes converts who come in, and I think especially for Jewish converts who are coming to any Christian denomination, it could be Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Coptic, Syro-Malabar, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for Jews to come into the church because the cross has been a symbol of oppression. For most Jews, we don't know much about Christianity. What do we know growing up? And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but we really know very little about Christianity growing up. We don't read the Gospels. The New Testament is not part of our scripture. So we don't read about Jesus. We don't learn about him. And what we do see is that the cross has been used as a symbol of oppression. And unfortunately, it still is that for many, many Jews coming into the church. And so, I do have friends who come from a Jewish background, and they lost their relationship with their parents. Their parents cut them off after they decided to accept Christ into their lives and into their hearts. So luckily, my parents, I did it very slowly. Sometimes you don't need to run home and wave the cross in the air. And, yes, we need to evangelize and spread the word, but not everybody's ready for it. Not everybody's ready for it. Okay, let's move on to my bar mitzvah photo. So here's a photo. The larger photo is of me and Rabbi Avram Fader on the day of my bar mitzvah in 1980. And it was Labor Day. It was a Monday. And usually bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs are on Saturdays. We decided to do it on Monday because it was right near my birthday. And this way I got to lead the entire service. I did led the prayer service, but I also was read from the Torah as well. And you can see that we're wearing phylacteries, the tefillin. So usually if it was a Shabbat service, we wouldn't be wearing tefillin. You don't, because you're not allowed to tie a knot on the Sabbath. Rabbi Fader, just want to mention him. He was a very charismatic leader, a great intellectual. He did a degree at U of T in theology. I think it was theology, or it was something like religious education. I think he got his degree in, and he studied with Northrop Frye. And if you know anything about Canadian intellectual history, you'll know Northrop Frye I think he was a Jungian actually, but great scholar at the University of Toronto at Victoria College, and where I met a great scholar there years later, not Northrop Frye, but another teacher who I'll talk about in a minute. But our Rabbi Feder was a great leader, a great intellectual leader, a great spiritual leader. He was not just the rabbi, he was also the cantor, and he always put so much feeling, so much emotion into his prayer leadership at the shul. We call it a shul, it's a synagogue. And eventually he moved his family to Israel. So he was a big Zionist, a supporter of Zionism. And his family led the way, and following him and his family, about 75 families from Beth Tikva synagogue moved to Israel. So you can see how important Zionism and Judaism were at that time for all of us. The photo on the bottom is actually a photo of All Saints Greek Orthodox Church, which is pretty much across the street from Beth Tikva synagogue. They're both on Bayview Avenue in Toronto. And I'm putting that photo there just to show what my exposure to Christianity was growing up. So we lived on the street behind All Saints. It was called Burbank Drive, and we lived there. It was a dead end street. We lived up near the dead end. We were always riding our bikes and playing road hockey and baseball and stuff. But every morning I would walk to Beth Tikva. Why was I walking to the synagogue every day? Because Rabbi Feder, being the visionary he was, stuck a school in there. So we started going. It wasn't the first year the school started, but it was early, or it would be early 1970s, and I would have, maybe 1972, 73. And I was in kindergarten and went up to grade 6 there. So I would walk every day, and we would walk by All Saints Greek Orthodox Church. And so you could see over the door of the church, there's this icon of Christ. And it was like, okay, there's that Jesus guy. And but that was about it, right? Growing up, that was my exposure to Christianity, which is nothing really. So I really knew nothing about the church and Jesus, and it just wasn't a part of our lives growing up. I think a lot of Christians assume that we know more than we do because Jesus was Jewish. And because Jesus was Jewish, we should know so much about him. We do in certain ways. I mean, we know about ancient Judaism and the life that he would have lived and the Torah, but we don't know about him as a person and who he was theologically. Okay, so let's move on. I just want to mention sort of like the zeitgeist at the time. Remember, I'm talking about the 70s, the 80s, growing up, going to a Jewish school. My parents invested in private education for us because they believed in it, right? They really believed in raising their kids in a Jewish in the most Jewish way they could, and that ultimately meant sending us to a Jewish day school, which meant we learned a lot about the Holocaust. Especially as you get older, not so much young kids. We did a lot of Bible study, reading the Bible, learning about prayers, how to pray in Judaism. On Fridays we would go from, it was in the same building, so we'd go from our classrooms into the synagogue and we would pray there. If it was Passover or Hanukkah time, we would do plays for Hanukkah. So it was a really integrated form of education. And I'm really grateful for my parents. My mom probably thinks that she wasted all that money because I eventually became an Orthodox Christian. But I think she still thinks I'm Roman Catholic, right? I think she doesn't. I don't think my mom knows what Orthodox Christian. If I say I'm Orthodox, she'll think I'm like, hey, where's my payas and my stroimel and my tzitzit. But I'm not that kind of Orthodox. But I'm very grateful to my parents for having had the sense to give us a Jewish education. I love being able to read the Bible in Hebrew. I love knowing about the Jewish liturgical services and seeing the connections. Father Schmemann talks about the roots of the liturgy in the synagogue and the temple, and seeing that, having lived that, right? Not the temple so much, where we weren't slaughtering goats and things. Synagogues are not temples; they're just houses of worship. But seeing the foundations of the ancient Christian worship grounded in Judaism. So we learned a lot about the Holocaust. We learned a lot about what happened to the Jewish people and anti-Semitism, throughout history that culminated in the Holocaust. But the remedy to anti-Semitism in the Holocaust was always taught to us as being Zionism. And Zionism was a big part of our growing up as well. And you can see here a photo of Israeli flags in front of the Western Wall, the Kotel. And so the idea here is that essentially, like, in order to prevent another Holocaust from happening, we need to have a strong state of Israel and a strong military. The strong military will prevent Jewish suffering and persecution. So that really is an important. That was the basic mindset, and it still is for many North American Jews, right? And who can to a certain extent, I mean, I know things are going on in Israel, Gaza, and a lot of, especially young people, are questioning that dynamic. But it's still a very much a force within Jewish life in Israel, North America. So that's the zeitgeist that I grew up with. My parents moved to Israel in 1978. We lived in French Hill, which is, this photo is being taken from Mount Scopus, and it's looking west to the setting sun over the old city of Jerusalem. You can see the Dome of the Rock there, which was built by the Muslims in, I think, the 8th or 9th century. So you were on Mount Scopus here. If you were to walk down the hill in front of us down to the valley, you would be walking down to the Kidron Valley, and it's the you would end up in the Garden of Gethsemane down there. If you were to walk to the south, to the left from here, you get to the Mount of Olives, and then Mount Scopus is really a range of hills, starting at Mount Olives in the Mount of Olives in the south, and then running to the French Hill neighborhood in the north. And that's where we lived in 1978. My parents moved back to Israel in. Actually, I went to Israel for a year of high school when I was in grade 10. I was not in Jerusalem. I was at a place called Givat, Washington, which is near Kibbutz Yavne. It's closer to the coast, not far from Rehovot. We were not far from Ashkelon, but it was inland. And the place we were at was an Orthodox Jewish institution. So we had daily prayers. I was wearing a kippah, and there I was wearing, the tzitzit, and we were praying every day. The following year, and it was about 1983, my parents decided they were going to move to Israel, and so we resettled into the French Hill neighborhood, and I started at a secular Israeli high school, but I was like the only religious kid there, and it was a really big school, and I was feeling kind of lost. So I actually ended up going to a religious school that was on the other side of town. It was a much farther commute, but I ended up being much happier there, and I met some good friends. So here's another photo of the old city of Jerusalem. So even though I was going to an Orthodox Jewish high school, I loved exploring the old city. Not just the old city, but I loved exploring what I would call ancient Jerusalem. And so there were some monasteries in the Valley of the Cross. I just saw that in the news the other day. I think there was a fire somewhere in the Valley of the Cross. And the Monastery of the Cross is there, and I loved exploring that. That'll come into my story a bit later on. But I loved exploring the old city, and especially the Armenian, the Christian, and to a certain extent the Muslim quarter. I felt a little bit less safe going into the Muslim quarter, being Jewish, and there was always like, is it safe? Is it not safe? Some people wouldn't even go to the old city, feeling like it's never safe to go there. I did feel like it was okay. The Jewish quarter is nice, but it's much more modern and kind of sanitized, and you don't have that sense of like, this is really ancient here. So, I used to just I didn't know where I was going. I would just get lost walking around the old city. And so in the photo here, what you see is a dome from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's obviously a minaret for a mosque, and then the Dome of the Rock. And again, the Dome of the Rock is on the Temple Mount, but it wasn't the Dome of the Rock there. The Golden Dome was not built by the Jews. That's not the Jewish temple. That was built by the Muslims after they conquered the Holy Land. So on one occasion, I ended up actually walking through some alleyways. I think I came in the New Gate, which is near the Armenian quarter, but then I kind of followed some alleyways down, and there was a big door. There was a courtyard and a doorway, and I went in, and I didn't know where I was. There was a big stone on the ground in the entrance hall of this building. It kind of looked like a church, but not exactly. And there was like some stone stairs going up to the right. Turns out I was in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I had no idea what it was or where I was standing. I went up those stairs, and when you go up those stairs on the right, right inside the doorway, you're walking up to the hill of Golgotha. And I stood there. That's what the insert photo is. It's the altar that is on Golgotha at the site of the crucifixion. I didn't know where I was. I barely understood what I was looking at. And I had some kind of like, there was like, I got a bit dizzy for a moment. There was almost like a flash of light that I experienced. And it wasn't a conversion moment because I had no idea what this was. But it was, I believe, the Holy Spirit sort of planting some energy into my soul. We talk about energies in the Eastern Church, and we're not afraid of that. And it was something that happened there that day. And then I left, kept being an Orthodox Jew and going on my way and going to high school. The high school I went to, like I said, it was Orthodox. It wasn't the yeshiva, like it wasn't one of those really, I had friends who were going to a yeshiva, but we did study Talmud. We were studying 13 hours a week of Talmud. Did very little Old Testament. We weren't reading the Bible, but we had 13 hours of Talmud every week. And some of the other new immigrants and myself, we would go with Rabbi Einsbacher. He's such a nice guy. He was like a really, really, he was a mensch. That's what we say in Judaism. He was a really nice guy. And I'm sure he would not be happy if he's still alive and he ever sees this video. God bless you for Rabbi Einsbacher, but I'm not Orthodox Christian because of you. I should have become an Orthodox Jew and studied Talmud till this day. I'm sure that's what you hope for. But I'm just mentioning him. And Rabbi Epstein was my classroom teacher, and he was a tough old nut, that guy, man. But my Hebrew wasn't that great, so I sat at the back of the class and just kind of nodded and but eventually graduated from high school, and I decided to stay in Israel. When my parents announced they were coming back to Canada, I stayed, and I actually went into the military. I joined the Israeli military and went into a combat unit. In grade 12, an officer from Golani came into our classroom and announced that he was starting a unit of young religious guys and some young men from kibbutzim, because he saw that the level of ideology and motivation was going down in Israeli society in general, but also in the military. And so he decided to start this unit, and we were the first year of this project. I think they did it for 2 or 3 years, maybe more. I don't know. So here's some photos of me in the Army. The photo on the bottom left there is our unit, and our platoon. And Guy Gardy is the guy pointing. He's our lieutenant. He was in charge of us. And he's pointing his finger at something off in the distance, but where his hand is landing is at Patrick Barbee's head. And so Patrick was from France. The guy standing to the right of Patrick is David. And then I'm to the right of David. David was from the States. Behind, on the other side of Guy is Hillel. He was also from the States. Can't remember where from. The guy who's kneeling down in front was also an American. We had an American and French. My friend Chaim was not in this photo, but Chaim was off in a course for medics at the time. And so we were actually, our platoon was called the United Nations because we had so many guys from all over the world. The photo with the yellow smoke grenade is after basic training. We did a really large exercise, and I was part of a small group that was guarding our battalion commander. He's the guy standing on the left there. And during that exercise, I almost died during that exercise because we started it at Qumran, and we climbed up the hills there and went into the desert as if we were on the other side of the Jordan, pretending to attack Amman, Jordan. But so as we're going into the desert, the artillery shells started shelling ahead of us, live fire artillery shells, and we're advancing with the artillery to the enemy position. Suddenly, the artillery starts coming back towards us, and we almost got turned into some of my Bobby's Kreplach at that point. So he had to like ceasefire, and eventually they stopped. The other two photos at the bottom, that's me and David, also I think at the end of that exercise. And then the photo at the bottom right is at the end of basic training. It was 6 months of basic training, at the end of which we did an 80-kilometer march with, you know, our gear and guys on stretchers, and it took us 12 hours. We went through the night, and can remember hearing the Dire Straits songs, "Brother in Arms." Somebody had a radio on at one point. It was really beautiful. Tough. It was hard. It was not easy, but I loved the Army. I was not a great student, partly in high school because of the Hebrew thing, and grade 10 I had a good year because our courses were in English. That was probably my best year of high school, best year of school maybe. And then when I went to university later on and I studied philosophy, I really enjoyed that as well. But you know, I didn't do well otherwise in school. So I got to the Army and suddenly I was really good at it. And I was kind of, I'm not as tough as I was back then. And I could punish my body a great deal more. And I believed in what I was doing. I believed in that kind of like the ideology of like the Holocaust happened. We're riding this wave of history and great things are happening. And we're bringing the Jews back to the Holy Land. And the Army needs to be there. I can remember this officer of ours, Hoshea, you know, as it was our swearing-in ceremony about, I don't know, a month, 2 months into basic, and we did a 30-kilometer march up from the foothills of Jerusalem, went through French Hill, walked by my house actually, and then we ended up at the old city at night at the Kotel. It was like with banners and torches and flags, and we had a Bible and our gun, and we're making an oath to the state of Israel, and it was very moving. But just before that big ceremony, you know, Hoshea, outside of the dung gate of the old city, he got up on a big rock and he gave us this really moving speech. And he said, you know, the only thing that's keeping the Jewish people alive is the state of Israel. And what keeps the state of Israel alive is you guys here, you soldiers who are training, and the guns that you have and the training you're going through are keeping the Jewish people alive. So again, we had that motivation going on, that mindset, that zeitgeist that I spoke of. And it was very much an important part of my military service. I'll just mention quickly the map in the center. So we were up in the north. Golani sounds like the Golan, so we were up in the Golan Heights a lot. But we also spent time on the northern border with Lebanon. Israel had a security zone inside of Lebanon. We were going in there doing ambushes, waiting for terrorists trying to infiltrate, stopping Katyusha rocket fire. We would go in as infantry. We would protect tanks that were doing, you know, night watches with infrared. On one occasion, a tank was taking fire and we had to go out and protect it. I got out with the big MOG machine gun and I took cover on this pile of rocks there, and I looked back and I see the two wires coming out between my legs. I'm like, they're gonna blow us up. So we quickly got out of there. But it was like, you know, it was intense. It was an intense period. But even taking those kinds of risks, and we had friends who were injured in training and in Lebanon under, you know, various circumstances. I still believed in what I was doing, and but I hit a wall at one point. So this is, remember, the mid 1980s, and the wall that I hit was when we went to the West Bank. And so I know it's very political, and I'm really talking about my own experience here. I don't want to be judging others or getting into a big political conversation or historical conversation at this point. But the Intifada started in 1987, and even before the Intifada started, which was the uprising, which was all over the West Bank and in Gaza, we had to go serve in the West Bank. And I remember being there in Ramallah prior to going to the sergeant's course, and we were doing home arrests, and we would take young kids. The smaller photo there, that boy to me looks like a teenager, but we were arresting kids who were like 10, 11, 12 years old, arresting them at midnight. We would bind their hands behind their back with zip ties, put flannelite around their eyes, throw them on the back of a truck, and take them down to the municipality for processing. And on one occasion, one of the boys, we got to the municipality, and the driver of the truck, who was a reservist, still Israeli military, took the handle of the radio and he started beating the kid in the head. And I was sitting there watching this. And after a couple of blows, I put my foot out and I said, no, enough. And he turned his wrath against me. It was a good thing my buddies were there. They got in between us. I think we were all kind of shocked about what we were witnessing. We were witnessing just vile abuse of a child, which is partly what the occupation's all about. And then when the Intifada started, we were on the West. I was training at the Golani base on the West Bank. And the first day of Intifada, we went to one of the villages nearby. And it was like this. I mean, these guys are not from my unit. This isn't, anybody I know, but this is what we did. We were, raising automatic weapons and firing at children who maybe were throwing rocks at us or yelling at us. And we chased a bunch of these kids. On one occasion, they went into a doorway. They were hiding in their home. And I can remember one of the guys, he was the chef of our unit. He came out and he was banging on the door. He had a nightstick. Finally, an old Palestinian lady with gray hair, she opened up the door and he dragged her out and just started beating her, like screaming, "Where are those kids? Where are those kids?" And we went back to the unit that night, and there were some really dark comments that were made about how to suppress this, and we should be just, executing Palestinians in order to put down this uprising. And it was at that point that I realized that, that dynamic of like the Holocaust and then Zionism preventing another Holocaust, and here we were participating in atrocities against children, against old ladies. And it wasn't working out the way it should have. I had a crisis, a moral crisis, an identity crisis at that point. I actually, on one occasion, went home for leave and I didn't go back to the army for, I don't know, it was like 10 days or something. So finally, when I went back, they threw me in the clink for 30 days. And my service got stretched out for a bit, but I was traumatized at that point. I mean, it was definitely, I think I was dealing with PTSD. And when I came back to Toronto, I was just, my head was not on right. And I had to get it fixed. So when I left Israel, I left Israel, I left the army, I left Zionism, I left Judaism, and I left God. And I just walked away from all of it, a big part of who I was. So I got back to Toronto. I started I thought I'd study history and psychology. I ended up doing a philosophy major, and it was therapeutic for me. A lot of people make fun of philosophy, but it teaches you how to think more than any other discipline. It teaches you how to think intellectually, how to grapple with text. Like I remember reading in first year, reading Kant and Descartes, and not easy text. So it intellectually, it's very gripping and could be a really great foundation if you want to go into law or other careers where you have to read a lot and think a lot. But I also gravitated towards the existentialist, and it was in a course with Professor Don Evans. And Don was a great mentor to me. So in his class, we were reading Buber and Marcel and Nicholas Berdyaev. And in that course, we also read Sartre as well. I studied Nietzsche and Kierkegaard in another course, but, Nietzsche's writings also, even though he was an atheist, and I toyed with atheism. I think I was an atheist for about, 2 weeks at some point, but it didn't last long. And I realized that, thinkers like Buber and Marcel can offer a different approach into religious life. I then discovered the writings of Carl Jung, and I really thought that kind of psychological journey and archetypes and, developing the relationship with the self is a really important place to go. So Don was a great mentor and introduced me to these thinkers, but he was also, he was a pastor, and he was into, I'd call neo-pagan shamanism. And he did workshops on that I attended. I joined a men's group that he was running, and he was also a therapist. And I went into therapy with him for the second time, and he was quite effective. And there was a lot of healing that happened when I was in therapy with him. The photo at the bottom here, the group photo, is actually some guys who I studied with in the philosophy class, with Michael and Lonnie's in there. And we bought a van that summer after this course on existentialism. ended, and we drove through, northern Ontario. We're going to powwows. This photo's in South Dakota, and we actually had an encounter with a buffalo, a bison out there, and it was a very spiritual and meaningful encounter for all of us. And then we drove through the rest of the states, came back to Canada, but it was a great time of exploration. The photo of the sunrise there is actually at Mount Sinai. So in the mid 1990s, while I was doing my philosophy degree, I went back to Israel for a friend's wedding, and I ended up going down first to a lot where Peter Gabriel was giving a concert on shipping containers in the lot port, and I got to see that concert. It was great. Then I went down into the Sinai and ended up at Mount Sinai, and you could say, oh, you're still involved in your Judaism. Not really. I mean, Mount Sinai is a Christian pilgrim site, but I wasn't going there really because of Judaism or because of Christianity. I wasn't, a Christian at that point, but I was in this kind of men's shamanic group, and I thought, oh, I should go do a vision quest at Mount Sinai. So I actually climbed the mountain, and I stayed there for a couple of days. I slept on Mount Sinai for a couple of days, and there was like a cave thing, and it was like this outcropping, and I was there for a couple of days, and I had some very powerful dreams that were very healing. Came back to Toronto, finished my degree, and then I went to study psychotherapy at the Transpersonal Therapy Center. Brent Mitten and Moira Keynes were running it. We were reading Ken Wilber. I think today it's called the Heart School. But, and Don was a part of that too. He was on the faculty there. So Don Evans was a big part of, my 20s and my spiritual growth. And I actually met my wife there in that program. Caroline was an upper year student. It was a 3-year program, and I was in first year. She was in third year. We got married. Caroline was running a health food store in Belleville. We raised 3 kids. The photo on the left is obviously at our wedding. We got married at Hockley Valley. We were like hippies. We're out in the woods and had this wedding, beautiful wedding. The photo on the bottom is actually at my brother's wedding. You can see how gorgeous Caroline was. And then the photo above that one, she's got Madeline when Madeline was a baby on her shoulders, and that's her mom, Rose, behind her. And then Kai is in his soccer uniform. And the upper right photo is actually Madeline when she's about 3 or 4, and Kai is about maybe a year old at that point. And then Kai is older in the soccer uniform. He's a teenager, and then with his younger sister. So we had there was a girl, a boy, and then a girl. The photo of the baby with me, that's Kai, and he was just a happy kid. And there he is on Caroline's shoulders in the bottom, and then our dog Susie with Kai and Coco. And we had a lot of tragedy, we had a lot of difficulties, but in spite of that, you can see a lot of smiles in these photos too. So when we first got married, we were living in Belleville, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half east of Toronto, and we had a health food store there. I had done the therapy degree, and I was doing some therapy. I was running a men's group and doing some psychotherapy at the time. And in our family life, we also continued with the spiritual seeking. So Caroline had been raised in a Lutheran home, but she left her Christian roots. We explored the Tanka there's of the medicine Buddha. We were going to a Buddhist temple here in Toronto for a while. We also explored traditions like Santeria. We met some people who were involved in a community here, and then we met the Babalao, the priest, and we went down to Cuba and did some amazing rituals down there. And this was already, Kai had been sick for a while, Caroline had been sick for a while with some serious illnesses. And the priest of the community said, we need to do these rituals to heal them and to protect them. We went down there, and I'm not involved in that tradition anymore. We broke our ties with it, and it's not compatible with living a Christian life. But I'll say that there's a lot of people who do both, right? Like in Cuba, you could be doing your Santeria stuff and then go to a Catholic church on a Sunday. So it does happen quite a bit. We were involved in it. And, a lot of people are quick to write these traditions off, like the Buddhism and the Santeria, and, it's all demon worship and all that. And I'm like, no, it's about community. It's about healing. It's about ritual. It's about beauty. It's about music and dance. You can see in the top photo, there's a guy there, and he was an ordained drummer, and those drums are sacred objects. You know, they don't worship the drums, but they drum them, right? And they have these beautiful, amazing drumming parties, and there's a lot of beauty in these traditions, and I think we should pause before we just outright condemn them as, you know, demonic and evil. And I do believe that Christianity, especially the Orthodox Church, is the truth, and that Christ ultimately speaks to us through the sacraments of the church and through prayer and through scripture. But there's a lot of beauty going on in other traditions as well, and sometimes people need to go there. I needed to go there. Our family was there for a while. Caroline, eventually in her life, she became a yoga teacher too. She was looking for healing. You know, she contracted an illness in 1998. It was an autoimmune condition, and it was pretty serious. So we were, you know, not just searching for spiritual stuff, but also for healing. And at times these paths can bring healing, but again, ultimately, it's Christ and his sacraments and his church that bring us healing. Okay. Here's two photos of when Kai was a young child. The first photo is of him, and he's not even a day old. He was born at home in a birthing tub. You can see how peaceful and calm he is. He's less than 24 hours old. He was born on the summer solstice in 1997. We had a midwife at home and a birthing tub in our kitchen. And we decided when he was born that the list of names we had picked out, that none of them really suited. So I was looking through a bunch of books that we had. Caroline had a book on Japanese tantric Buddhism, and the name Kai was in there. And the name was the definition given to the name. It was explained as being Kai meant deep, still waters. And so that just suited him. That's who he was. He had a deep, calm soul throughout his life. He rarely got angry. And he helped me to deal with my anger. Yeah, I'm still dealing with my anger. But the name really suited him. And the other picture is, well, you know, the other side of his life was being a warrior. And he had to battle a huge monster in his life. And that monster was cancer. So in 2002, when Kai was 5, we actually closed the health food store. We moved back to Toronto. I started a teaching career. And just a couple months after we moved back to Toronto, Kai went for an eye checkup. He had a wandering eye, and it turns out it was a brain tumor. So he went down to Sick Kids. They did a Sick Kids hospital. Dr. Peter Dirks met us there, and they did a scan and found out that he had a tumor at the back of his head. And it was a medulloblastoma, posterior fossa tumor that was pushing in on his brainstem. And so it was very serious at that point. He probably had this tumor from when he was in utero. So it had been growing for a while. And it was starting to impact on his heart rate. And so they kept us at the hospital. And he had to wear a heart monitor while the surgery team was getting ready for the surgery. While we were there in the hospital, you know, I had been very far from all of, you know, from Judaism and really still not anywhere close to Christianity. But while we were waiting for the surgery, the story of the binding of Isaac came back to me, and it was really with me in those weeks and months that Kai was going through his journey. So initially the hospital team wanted him to go through surgery, which he did. And then he went through radiation therapy, and then he was supposed to go through 9 months of chemo. He's 5 years old, right? So after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. He said, take your son, your only son, Kai, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And Kai said to his father, My father. And I said, Here am I, my son. Kai said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And I said, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them, together with him. So I've kind of rewritten, the passages from the Bible. It doesn't, if you've never read the Bible, no, it doesn't have Kai's name in there. But this story was really with me in those weeks of October of 2002. And I guess for me, my brain was really trying to make sense out of what was going on. So, like I said, Kai, the tumor was starting to push on his brainstem. So it was a very serious situation. And eventually he went through surgery. The surgery was successful, and I got 98% of the tumor out. And it was quite large. They said it was larger than they thought it would be. But it left him in a wheelchair, and it left him mute for 9 months. So it had a pretty devastating effect on him. He then had to start radiation therapy. And the radiation therapy was taking place at Princess Margaret Hospital, which is on University Avenue in Toronto, across the street from Sick Kids, if you don't know Toronto. So they're both downtown Toronto. And there's a tunnel that goes for the hospital for sick kids under University Avenue, and it comes up in Princess Margaret, and that's where they were doing the radiation therapy. And I was teaching in downtown Toronto. So this is a photo looking north to where the hospitals are. And I walked from work one day up University Avenue. And as I was walking, I felt that somebody was around me. So I looked around, there was nobody there. But I distinctly felt a presence. I think it's the only time in my life I've ever felt that. And, I was 32 at the time. I had not been to synagogue in years. I hadn't prayed to God, hadn't read the Bible in a long time. But I thought for a moment that it occurred to me that somebody is there. So I just said, Lord, if that's you, then please take me instead of Kai. That was my prayer. And I walked up to the hospital. Kai went through his radiation therapy. I walked him back to Sick Kids, and then I was walking back to work, coming back down University Avenue. And I was at University and King Street. And I can remember seeing the walk sign. I had the walk, and I'm crossing the light, and suddenly a cab came through the intersection, and he hit me. Threw me. It must have been 30 feet because I was in the walk, and it's a big intersection, and I ended up like at the other side of the intersection. And I was unconscious, but I woke up, and then, there are a bunch of people around me, and I said I was okay. I wasn't. I was not okay, but I was like, I was in the army. I'm okay. Eventually, an ambulance got there very quickly. This is 20 years ago. It's not like today in downtown Toronto. Nobody can move around anywhere. But I told the ambulance guy I was fine. I got up, started walking back to work. By the time I got to work, my knee was the size of a basketball. So I went down to St. Joseph's Hospital, which is near where we lived at the time. And it turns out I had a hairline fracture in my leg, so it was broken. They didn't put a cast on it, but the leg was still swollen. I ended up getting home. I actually think my mother-in-law was there, so I think she drove me. And I later that night, I was sitting in bed, icing my leg, and it occurred to me that somebody heard my prayer, that somebody responded to me. And, it was a big eye-opening moment. Sort of God was coming back, not through love and peace and harmony, but coming back with, a cab hitting me. But it was also what I prayed for, let me take a blow for him. And I believe that that's true, that we can do this thing. It's not a popular idea in the church today. Nobody wants to talk about that kind of stuff. It's not part of the zeitgeist of the church today. But saints have done this over the years, and I think it happened on that day. So Kai continued through his therapy, went for another 30 sessions in of radiation therapy. For some reason, this slide isn't coming up properly. Okay, here we go. And so he finished the radiation therapy, which also had devastating effects on him. Gave him a lifelong learning disability and other effects that I'll talk about briefly. But Dr. Eric Buffet was the head of oncology at Sick Kids, said, and it was like January or February, Kai was about to start the 9 months of chemo. And Dr. Buffet said, you know what, we should take another look at what's going on inside of his head. So we did an MRI. And unfortunately, the results of the MRI showed that the original tumor site seemed to be okay. There wasn't a lot going on in there, but he had, it was in the side of his neck. Another tumor was growing. So Dr. Buffet showed this, to the radiology people, and they consulted, and the consensus was that if a tumor could be growing during the 30 radiation sessions, that this was not good. So they said the protocol's not working. Even though Caroline and I came from the health food background, we decided to go with the protocol they were offering, even though it was quite intense with surgery, radiation, chemo. And at that point, though, when this came back, Dr. Buffet said, Kai probably has 6 to 9 months to live. It was actually another doctor, Dr. Hyder, who was there. He's an American guy doing a rotation at Sick Kids in Toronto. I think he was from Chicago. But Dr. Hyder, said, maybe 6 to 9 months by the time this thing grows. But Dr. Buffet said to us, look, we're not going to go through with the rest of the protocol because it's obviously not working. And we're giving you guys 6 to 9 months, but we'll give you palliative chemotherapy at this point. They do this to slow down the tumor. So Caroline and I thought about it for a couple of days, and we're like, you know what? They had their shot. We're going to go back to all of our health food stuff. And, we had also been seeing, I said, we're going to a Tibetan Buddhist temple. So we were seeing a Tibetan doctor, Dr. Shekya Dorje, who's still practicing here in Toronto, an amazing, amazing doctor, herbalist. He does Tibetan medicine and herbalism. We knew him because Kai went to him when he was 3. Kai had a persistent cough, and we went to naturopaths and medical doctors, and nobody could get rid of it. And they said he needs to be on a puffer. He'll be on it for the rest of his life. Somebody told us about this Tibetan guy in Toronto. We went to Shekya Dorje, and he gave us this herbal concoction. We gave it to Kai for a few days. Cough was gone. Anyway, so we thought, oh, this guy, he can work some magic. So we started seeing him. We started doing juicing, and really we were already eating a clean diet, but the supplements and other stuff. And I can remember Dr. Buffet at the hospital. He was like, you're believing in nonsense. This is crap. There's no science to what you're doing. Well, what are we supposed to do? Just give up? I think he thought we would be good, obedient parents and say well, the doctors are saying our child must die, therefore the child must die. And I, in particular, Caroline, we were both devastated at that. We'd already gone through initial diagnosis of cancer, watching our son go through all this crappy treatments that they have to put him through that are so devastating. And then, but I was like, I still had a lot of fight in me. I still, that Israeli soldier guy was like, no, fuck, I'm not giving, sorry. I'm not giving up, not giving up on my son. That's it coming out there, a little, inappropriate word that came out, but that was the energy. I'm like, no, screw it. You guys, you failed, my turn. So we turned to all this stuff. Dr. Michael Murray from Natural Factors, my brother-in-law was working for them, and he put us into IP6. And so we did a lot of stuff. At the same time, we were put in touch with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who they were like, you guys want to go to Disney, right? And they were like, we asked Kai, and Kai actually said, I want to go see my Opa in Germany. So the Make-A-Wish people, they didn't believe us. They thought, oh, it's like mom and dad, Caroline and Shawn, they want to go have a European vacation. So they sent two people over to the apartment. And again, Kai's in a wheelchair. He's still not walking, still not talking at this point. And he kind of wrote down, or he indicated somehow that he wanted to go to Germany. So we flew to Munich. My father-in-law is a very colorful guy. He was a jazz musician for many years. Lived in Munich most of his life. Came over here to Canada when he was married to Caroline's mom. They got divorced. He went back to Munich. And so we were there for a while, and you can see in this photo, like Kai and John, they really had a very loving connection, even though John was living over there. But Kai just felt like, yeah, he's my oppa, right? Like, just had this bond together. So after we spent about a week in Munich, we went up to the mountains, and Caroline had found this monastery, and not because she was getting nostalgic for her Lutheran roots or anything. It was a Catholic monastery, a Benedictine monastery, and it was called Kloster Ettal. And you can see this is an aerial photo of the monastery. And it was like being in The Sound of Music, right? Like, you'd walk through these beautiful green fields in the morning, and early in the for some reason I was getting up early, and I could hear the monks. I guess they were doing matins, and they were singing Gregorian chant, and it was just amazing. It was just really beautiful. The first night we were there, we went to a little restaurant that's up on, I think it's one of those like houses behind, but to the left of the dome of the monastery there was a restaurant, and we parked the car and we got out, and there were like thousands of frogs, tiny little frogs leaping everywhere. It's like, oh, it's like being in Egypt or something. There was definitely, and the air is different up there. Kai slept for about 20 hours that night. He was in a deep, deep sleep. It was like Rip Van Winkle sleep. And Caroline and I knew it was and this is where his body needs to like go. And so there's the clean air, the Germans are one thing they do well is make sure their food supply is very clean. But I think there's also something about when people are sick and when people are dying, there's something about going home. And obviously, I mean, Kai's home was here in Toronto, but he was going to his roots. It's about going and connecting back with the ancestors, right? You're connecting to it's like a Santeria thing, right? You connect with your ancestors. And that's what he was doing there. So we traveled around. There's a little village near the monastery called Mittenwald, and we went there, and they make violins, and it was like all these beautiful village. I think we took a cable car up to the Zugspitze one day, and we did all this great stuff. On the last day, we had breakfast, paid our bill, and then we left. We were pulling out of the parking lot. I was going to drive back on the road there. You can see under the photo. And then drive back down to Munich, and we were going to head home. But I said to Caroline, why don't we go and see the church? We've been here for a week. Let's just go in and just check out the inside of the church. It's supposed to be really beautiful. And she said, no, why would I want to do that? Like this Catholic nonsense. It's like, Catholic church, patriarchy, rah. It's like I got some of that. And I'm like, I'm not going in there to become a Catholic. I mean, eventually I did. But I said, I just want to see it. So she said, okay, I'll stay. She stayed in the car. I went into the church. So I walked into, so the church is the big domed building with the monastery all around it there. So I went into the church, which was open to the public. And I walked inside, and immediately I'm like, I'm the Jewish guy from Toronto. I don't think there was anybody in the church. I don't remember anybody being there. And remember, this is like 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, 22 years ago. And actually it was 2003. It was in March of 2003. So there's a little statue on the side of a guy with two horns. And I'm like, oh, that's Moses. It's Moses with his Karanaim. And I'm like, okay, I'm not the only Jew in the building. So then I walked up towards the front, and this is actually a photo I found online of the altar at Mittenwald, not in Mittenwald, in Ettal, at the Church of Ettal, and I just was standing there. I just, again, I just went in to see it, but and it's a late, it's a kind of like Baroque, very ornate. It's not very Orthodox. Very, very ornate church. Very beautiful. Not my style. I prefer icons and candles, but there's candles here. After a few moments of just standing there in the church, I was just drawn to the cross. Drawn to the cross. And as I was standing there, again, I have no theological training. I have never read the New Testament, let alone reading anything about the theology of the cross. But like that moment where I wandered into the Holy Sepulchre, I didn't have a flash of light this time, but there was a magnetic pull to the cross. And the pull was all about understanding that this was a story of a father watching his son die. That's what I understood on that day, which is, I think, a unique take on the story of the cross. Most people don't think of the father there. I mean, Mary's standing there. Mary's at the cross. But I was aware, even then I didn't know Mary was at the cross, but I was aware of the father witnessing his son dying. But I also saw how this was my story. This was our story. This was Kai's story. And it really just held me there. It just held me in that moment. And suddenly from coming in as a kind of like a curious tourist, I was suddenly having a life transforming moment. And I realized that I didn't articulate this at the time, but I realized that God was showing me something, that I was, I came in as a curious tourist to turn into a prayerful devotee. I'm not even sure that's the right description, but I definitely had a heartfelt moment there where time stopped. Time kind of stopped, the world stopped, and the cross was standing in front of me. And again, I just uttered a very short prayer. And I just said, Lord, heal my son. It wasn't long. I didn't get into the whole history. Hey, I've been away for a while. And by the way, I don't really know who you are, but Lord, heal my son. I stood there for another minute or so, and then went back to the car, and I was silent I didn't even know what or how to describe this to Caroline, right? And I wasn't sure how she would receive it. So which was the beginning of a rift in our marriage. But I eventually, we went back to Toronto, and I eventually explored more of my Christianity. It took me a few years. In the meantime, we're back in Toronto. It's the spring of 2003. So remember, so it's May, and it's Mother's Day. And so now, we did that MRI in February. So it's like 3 months after that, now we're living not just with the cancer diagnosis, we're living with the sort of disease over our heads. And Kai wakes up. And so he's sleeping with us. Carolina had a really large bed that we received from my parents for a wedding gift. And we kept Kai in the bed with us because he could hardly move. He was still in a wheelchair, and it was hard for him to talk. So we thought if something happens at night, we need him close by. So he woke up, and he had just started speaking a couple of days before this, like a few words. I think his first word was banana. I think that's what the first thing he said was when he started talking again. So on Mother's Day, he wakes up and he looks at Caroline and he says, "Life is about Jesus and wisdom and death. It's about being courageous and strong." As we recite in the Nicene Creed, the Holy Spirit who spoke through the prophets. And that's what was happening. The Holy Spirit was speaking through him, and he was giving Caroline a message. He was giving me a message, giving Madeline a message. He was giving himself a message too. And I think he's 5 years old. His birthday was in June, so it was just about a month away from his birthday, but not yet 6 years old. And these words come out of his mouth. And so again, another moment in our life where, I'll pause and I'll say, a secular atheist will hear my story as like, okay, you're an idiot when you're crossing the street and you got hit by a cab. So, you saw a cross and like, it was a big deal. Like, people can write off these experiences. I can't write this one off as easily. But then when you put the story together, when you put the narrative together, it starts making sense. And it starts making sense that there's somebody else there who's part of the story, who's guiding the story. So, we're doing all this work. We're seeing Shakya. He's given us herbs that Kai has to have 3 or 4 times a day. He also gave us these things they were Tibetan jewel pills, and they came from Tibet or Nepal, and they were photosensitive. So Shakya said, you got to get up in the middle of the night, don't turn on the lights, you got to grind it up in a bowl. And then, I gave it to Kai with some applesauce or something. And he had to eat those. We're giving him like I said, we had a conversation with Dr. Michael Murray from Natural Factors, and he was really pushing IP6 at the time. So inositol hexaphosphate is what it's called, IP6, which is a very strong. It helps cells return to normal. Okay, and we were just mega dosing Kai on that stuff, and then we were juicing and doing all sorts of stuff. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't go down to, there was a doctor down in Texas at the time who was doing some kind of therapy, and we looked into it. It was like, I think $200,000. And we're like, we don't have that money. So we're doing like low cost therapies in Toronto. And we're doing the work. And in September, with all this work there's Shakya Dorje, MT Shakya Dorje, Dr. Eric Buffet, IP6, that's what the container looks like. So we went back to Sick Kids in September. Kai was still walking, and he did an MRI, and he was cancer-free. So both the original cancer site was clear, and that when the medulloblastoma site at the back of his head, but also the cancer that was growing in his neck. And the reason they couldn't do surgery was because it was right on the main artery in his neck. Dr. Buffet kind of just like shrugged it off. He said, "Oh, it must have been an anomaly on the MRI." But the problem with that explanation is it doesn't explain the fact that the original tumor didn't come back and Kai didn't do any of the chemo, right? So we got rid of the original tumor plus the thing and he said, "Oh, we consulted with Princess Margaret and radiology people, and it was like definitely a tumor." There can be, I will admit that there can be anomalies on MRIs. But the fact is that they took a tumor out of the back of my son's head. That tumor did not grow back. That in the very least, even if the second tumor that they were convinced was there because they stopped their protocol, And I can say that that tumor, the medulloblastoma, and the tumor that may have been in his neck never came back again. So maybe my prayer had something to do with it, and maybe doing all this work with Shakyamuni and IP6 and the diet we were giving him, maybe all of that also had something to do with it. It was a year or two later, and Caroline's grandmother, who also lived in Munich, was turning 100. So we went to Munich again. We went with my mother-in-law, who came over for the celebration. And then we decided to drive from Munich down to Florence. And if you're looking for something to add to your bucket list, do that drive through the Alps. It's amazing, amazing, amazing drive. We ended up staying in a farmhouse outside of Florence. And one day we were going to go to the Uffizi Gallery, and like the wait you get there is like, oh, it's 8 hours to get tickets, right? And we thought, nah, we're not going to do this. So Caroline, who had a master's degree in art history, said, oh, there's this church on the other side of town, and it's called Santa Maria Novella, and I did a paper on it. Why don't we go there? So we went to Santa Maria Novella Church, and you can see that even from the outside, it's a basilica, and it's a beautiful Catholic church. And we walked inside, and there is suspended from the ceiling a 20-foot cross painted by the Italian artist Giotto. And as soon as I saw the cross, my jaw hit the floor, and I said the words, "Oh my God." And it wasn't just out of shock. It was really, I was confessing my faith. This is my God. Here is my God. And I can remember, it wasn't a flash, but I remember feeling something. And this prayer came into my soul, and it was, Lord Jesus Christ, Holy Son of God, shine your mercy upon my soul, resurrect within my heart, and lead me to my death in you. So it's sort of this mystical, elongated version of the Jesus prayer. And at that point, I started obsessing over this cross. I bought a small miniature version of it that one of my godsons has now. And I have in my icon corner, I have a poster of the Giotto cross, and it's at the center of my icon corner. And so this cross, and Caroline was like, what's with you and the cross? I'm like, I told her what happened, and she was like, you're crazy, right? The problem with leaving your faith and then exploring all of these other wonderful traditions is that you close the door and you say, that's all nonsense. I need to find the truth somewhere else. And what, fortunately for me, God was showing himself to me through the cross. So at this point, I knew I had to start seriously exploring Christianity. I was in teaching for a while, and then I went back to the health food industry because of Kai, and I got a job as a sales rep, and I kept doing detours into churches in Toronto, mostly Catholic churches. And actually the one church I went to the most was St. Mike's Cathedral in downtown Toronto, sitting there a lot and just, feeling God. That's how I can describe it the best. So that's what my life was like for a couple of years, starting to read a little bit. I had a friend who was into Christianity, and I was talking to him about things, some of my doubts and my fears. And eventually I did contact fathers of the oratory down at Holy Family Church, who are Roman Catholic. And I started to talk to them. I went through a catechism with them, which was a great catechism. They're great priests. They specialize in philosophy. And it was Father David's dad, I think, was Jewish or half Jewish or something. So there was a connection there. And I really enjoyed that time. They're men who took their faith very, very seriously. And that eventually led me to get baptized. But I chose along the way to go into the Eastern Church. In the meantime, Caroline, I had mentioned that she had been sick. In 1998, she developed an autoimmune disease. It was a year after Kai was born. And she actually felt very conflicted with the pregnancy. She was very angry. very angry. It was like a white hot rage at the start of the pregnancy, which may have affected her in some way. Then our business in Belleville, the health food stores, started to decline when Walmart and Shoppers started selling vitamins, and we just couldn't make a living doing it anymore. So our income was going down, and she wasn't telling anybody. She wasn't telling the business partner. She wasn't telling my mother-in-law. She wasn't telling me. And she was like, but every time the phone rang, she thought it was a bill collector, and she would like jump out of her skin. So she repressed a lot of the emotional stuff, and I think that's what led to her getting sick. Years later, so that the illness began in 1998, a year after Kai was born. I started seriously exploring Christianity in 2006, 2007. And then I told her I was going to get baptized. And it started causing a big rift in our marriage. So, I started the presentation talking about my parents and how the relationship with them is still going okay. But eventually our marriage unraveled. And it wasn't just because of my newfound faith. It was other things as well. But it did have a negative impact. Her illness eventually caused difficulties with her heart. So with scleroderma, initially it looks like arthritis. It's a joint-related issue, and it can go into remission. That's when Coco was born. But then it affected her. It affected her face, her jaw, her teeth, and eventually it affected her heart. And she died in April of 2011, and it was about a month before I was supposed to get baptized. The arteries of her heart had hardened because of the illness, leading to her death. So it was a very difficult. It was a week before. I think it was during Holy Week, or it was the Friday before Holy Week, and it was very difficult. A very difficult time for all of us. But I decided to go ahead with my baptism, and I was baptized at St. Elias Ukrainian Catholic Church in Brampton, Ontario, which is north of Toronto. So it was a Ukrainian Catholic church. So I had been doing my catechism with Fathers of the Oratory. Then somebody invited me to St. Demetrius Ukrainian Catholic Church. And I met Father Peter Shimelda. He and I are still very good friends. And because of him, he was doing a Bible study class at the time. And I said to him, I think I want to become Eastern Catholic. And he was like, okay, finish your catechism with the Fathers of the Oratory, because they've got a great program going on there. But then we'll do full immersion baptism. And I was a triple immersed in the pond at St. Elias. You can see Father Peter walking through the water. He's like, St. John walking through the water, or Peter, or St. Peter walking on the water. In the top middle photo, I'm getting immersed. He's about to dunk me. Michael Starosa, a friend, came in with us to make sure nobody drowned. And in the bottom photo there, I'm being immersed under the water. So it was triple immersion. The ceremony was the exact same ceremony that Orthodox do. I know that can be a controversial issue, but I was baptized. We believe in one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. The bottom left photo, I'll just mention it for, I'm wearing my great-grandfather's prayer shawl after I came out of the baptism, waiting for getting chrismated at that point. Father Peter saying some of the prayers. Father Jerry Shudrak is there, and he's taking a photo. He's standing right in front of or behind Father Peter. Father Tom Krivna was also there. He's acting as the cantor. Father Roman came, and Father Deacon David Kennedy was also there. They had a lot of clergy, and there were about 30 or 40 people at the baptism, and they really it's a blessing for people of faith, for Catholics and Orthodox who usually only see babies getting baptized. To see an adult convert come into the faith is a wonderful experience. And actually, as I was being baptized in the water, it started raining lightly. And one of the people there, I think it was Julia Goldie, said to me, like, it felt like we're all getting baptized. So it was a really beautiful day. I'm still in touch with a lot of the people that I met in the Ukrainian Catholic Church. Still, like I said, very good friends with Father Peter Shimelda. Father Bogdan Svistun is on the left there. He and I are very good friends. Deacon Paul from Holy Eucharist, he and I are very good friends. Isabel Massey is wearing the red sweater. She's there in the middle. So she was also teaching a class. Father Peter was doing his Bible study. Isabel was teaching a class on Jean-Claude Larcher, on his work, the therapy of spiritual illness. Now, it was before it came out in English. So this was back in 2010. Father Jerry and Deacon Eugene from St. Demetrius wanted Isabel to teach this book. And it wasn't available in English. So she was sitting every week. She would sit down with the book in French, translate a chapter from the French into English, type it up on her typewriter. She wasn't even working with a computer or a laptop at that point. She was typing it up on her typewriter, went to her printer down the street, had copies made, and would end up in Father Jerry's dentist office. He was a priest and a dentist. So she was teaching, like, I think it was every Thursday night or something in his office. And we were told about this. I was told about it. And so I went with my friend Edwin, the Jewish guy who believed in Jesus. And we said, let's go check out this class that we heard about. We heard it's in a dentist's office near Dundas and Bloor. So we went into a dentist's office at Dundas and Bloor and said, we're here for the Bible study. And the secretary thought we were crazy. We're obviously in the wrong office. We went around the corner. We found the right office. And Father Jerry was there. Julia Goldie was a big part of that. And she and I became very good friends. And, it was a huge part of my life. I was in the Ukrainian Catholic Church for 10 years. And eventually I felt like I needed to move from Eastern Catholicism into Orthodoxy. You can see my daughter is dancing. She's doing Ukrainian dance. Father Peter and Marta are at my birthday there. And the bottom left photo is actually ordained as a subdeacon, along with Greg and Mark and Myron, with Bishop Stephen Khmilar, who we should pray for him as well. He's in the hospital. And it was a really wonderful community, very supportive, and they're very supportive while we went through, I was a single dad, and as you'll see, we had more to our journey. And so that's the last part of my story is really coming up here soon. But here's one photo of I did a Passover Seder. So my parents had I had not come out when I got baptized. I did not tell my parents. And some of my friends were like, you got to tell your parents, you got to tell your family. And I'm like, the Lord will reveal the way. And I did not want to assault them and traumatize them with my faith decision. Eventually, I was asked by Sister Rachel to do a Passover Seder. And you can see there were about 100 people there at St. Demetrius Ukrainian Catholic Church. So we're down in the church hall. And I put together the Seder Haggadah. My parents came, so my dad is sitting beside Father John there. My mom's there. I think that Faith and Alexandra Goldie are there with Joey, and my godmother's there, Janet. And we did the Passover Seder. So it was very easy for my parents to come downstairs into the church for a Passover Seder, rather than going upstairs and seeing icons and incense and the liturgy. That would have been much more difficult for them. So I think this kind of event helped my parents to accept my faith choice. In 2013, Father Peter and I went to the Holy Land. We led a pilgrimage. If you're Ukrainian and you live in Toronto, you probably know some of these people, because I think they're all Ukrainian in the photo, except for Kai's at the front there carrying the cross. And he was really at his best at this point in his life. He's about 15 or 16 at this point. And Stella is beside him carrying the cross there. I'm at the very back. You can see a little kid on somebody's shoulders. That's Coco on my shoulders there. And part of this trip, I decided to go back to, I had mentioned the Monastery of the Cross earlier. When I was in high school, I used to go exploring in Jerusalem. And I said to the tour guide, we want to go to the Monastery of the Cross. So I said, nobody ever goes there. So we went there. And behind the main church, there's a chapel there. And I'm not going to get into the whole story. Maybe I'll do a video on it. It's the church is built at the site where the wood for the cross grew. And there's a small chapel in behind. There's icons telling the story. And then there's a small altar. And in the Holy Land, sometimes these altars have these like holes in the floor where something happened. And it's usually inlaid with like copper or gold or, silver. And Kai actually got on his hands and knees, crawled under the altar, started rubbing the floor. I went down, I said, are you okay? And he was in a very prayerful place, and he was like meditating. And our whole tour group was in there. And then he got up, he went over to Stella, who was there standing with Father Peter. He didn't come to me. It was interesting. He went right to Father Peter and Stella, and he said, he was looking at in Stella's eyes, and he said, I want to be baptized like Jesus in the Jordan. And at that point, Father Peter said, let's get in a cab. We'll drive down to the Jordan and we'll just go do it. And I was like the group leader, and I was like, we got to get people back to the hotel. They're going to complain. It's dinner time. Da, 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 da. And I did the responsible thing, which I shouldn't have done. We should have been listening to the promptings of the Holy Spirit. We went back to the hotel, said, we'll drop everybody off. And then it was later and it was night. And, it was like, okay, maybe we'll go tomorrow. Well, Kai woke up the next day and he's like, you know what? Whatever. I don't want to do that anymore. We missed an opportunity. When the Holy Spirit comes into somebody's life and says, I want to be baptized like Jesus in the Jordan, you go do it. But God still wanted Kai to be baptized. So he's going to do it by hook or by crook. So in August of 2014, a year after our pilgrimage, Kai had been going back every year to sick kids to do an MRI and just to follow up a checkup. And everything was always clear. In August of 2014, they found a spot. And we were dealing with, at that point, Dr. Uta Bartels. And she said, look, this spot could be nothing. We can keep an eye on it. We can see if it grows. We'll do another MRI in, another couple of months or something. Or we can do surgery. And I said, do the surgery, go in there, get it out, see what it is. So they did the surgery, and it was not in the original tumor site, and it was not in the neck. It was on the side of his head. So it was a completely new cancer site. And it turned out to be cancer. And they came back and they told us, they analyzed it in the lab at sick kids, and they said, based on this, what we found, he has a glioblastoma. So it was not the same kind of cancer, a new kind of cancer. It was a glioblastoma. And this is like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of cancers. And at that point, they gave us 3 months. He said, this is in August of 2014. He said, by Christmas, he's going to be gone. So I talked to Kai about this, and he says he wants to fight it. And so we went back to Shakadorje, contacted also Dr. Tammy Grime, my friend Edwin, who had come with me to Dr. Jerry's office that night. He was working in the health food industry. So I said, who's the best naturopathic oncologist in Toronto? Dr. Tammy Grime. So we went to see her. She put us on the ketogenic diet. Again, we went back to IP6, Tibetan herbs. Kai was doing intravenous vitamin C, high dose of vitamin C. He was doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We went on an extreme ketogenic diet. He was actually in ketosis, and the idea there is to starve the cancer. Dr. Peter Dirks operated on Kai again this time, and he said to me, meeting follow-up from the surgery, he said, it was me and my kid, I'd go on a cruise and just, spend as much time as you can together. And I said, well, we're going to fight it, and we're going to fight it with a ketogenic diet. And he paused, and I'll remember this. I'll never forget this. And he said, using ketogenics makes sense because we know that carbs feed these tumors. And when I went back to Dr. Eric Buffet, and I asked him, why aren't you telling this to families? His response was, it's too hard. We don't want to put the pressure on families. So we started doing all this work. And what eventually happened was that Christmas came and went, and Kai did an MRI in January, and it showed that the tumor post-surgery, it had come back a little bit, but they said it would be like all over his head at that point, and it wasn't. So we knew it was still there, but it was not growing the way we thought it would. He delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. So, we didn't listen to God about getting baptized. And then he speaks to us through adversity sometimes. So after the MRI that we did in January of 2015, I said to Kai, look, you're either going to beat this thing or you're not going to beat this thing. Everybody at the hospital said, you're not going to beat it. Like, Kai was doing a little bit of radiation. Dr. Norm LePerrier, Dr. Eric Buffet, everybody at Sick Kids was like, you can't beat this thing. And I said to Kai, look, we're doing all this work. We're holding it in check. But maybe you want to think about your relationship with God. Because Kai, I didn't force him to get baptized when I got baptized. So he was not baptized yet. And I said to him, if you're going to live, getting baptized will show God that you mean business and you want him to help you in this process. If you're not going to live, you want to show God that you mean business and that he'll help you on your journey to the next life. So Kai said, okay, he'll get baptized, but he has 3 conditions. It was a conditional baptism. He said, Father Peter has to do it, which was not a problem. The second thing was that our dog Susie, who was in the photo there, had to be at the baptism. And the third thing was he needed 30 video games. I said, okay, we can, I don't know about the dog thing, but we'll do the rest. And Father Peter said, well, we can't have the dog in the church. So we went to the Marian Shrine on Weston Road. And if anybody knows about the Marian Shrine, there were miracles that had happened there. It was built by a Basilian Ukrainian monk who had a branch go through his head, and he was miraculously healed from it. So Father Basil had built this shrine, and he was actually there on the day that Kai got baptized. And it was in May. We did this in May. I think it was in May. Yeah, so maybe the MRI was a bit later. My timeline might be off. But and Kai got baptized. I had the dog in one hand and the camera, and it was like, it was a beautiful day. We had, I don't know, 20, 30 people, and it was a beautiful celebration. And Kai was still doing really well, showing really no signs or symptoms of anything. So about a month after the baptism, a guy who was one of my officers in the Israeli army, who was now an oncologist working at Sick Kids, Dr. Uri Tabori, and he calls us up. So Kai does an MRI a month after the baptism, and Uri Tabori calls me with the results, and he says, "You're not going to believe this, Shawn, but the tumor is reduced by 80%." This was really a miracle. And the heads of surgery, Dr. Dirks, Dr. Eric Buffet, the head of oncology at Sick Kids, and Dr. Norm LePerrier, who was at Princess Margaret in the radiology department, they all said, you're not going to get rid of it, and it's impossible even to shrink it. So I believe that this is another miracle that we experienced with Kai. He did another MRI a couple of months after this. I think in August, we did another MRI, and the tumor was completely gone. So for me, like theologically, it's like we were doing our work. We were doing our work down here, and we were showing God that we mean business. But then we turn to him and we ask for his graces to come in. And that's what does it, right? It doesn't mean we have to stop doing our work because it will just rely on God. It's not faith alone. It's both. It's a synergistic relationship. And I do believe that the diet and the herbs and the medicine and everything we were doing did play a role in this. Unfortunately, the doctors were like, we don't care. They're like, it was like, it didn't even register. Anyways, Kai was thriving. He was still doing the diet. He did it, he was on this program for another year and a half or so. You can see that how well he's doing. I love the photo of him in the woods up at my mother-in-law's cottage. He's there with Susie. He is holding the picture of him with the friend of mine. My girlfriend at the time had it framed for us. And he's there on his soccer team. And he loved soccer. And there he is with, that's actually Rabbi Fader's daughter, Bracha. And I just thought he looked so confident there. He struggled, and he was struggling, and as time went by, he lost a lot of weight because of the crazy diet, the ketogenic diet. And he was doing therapy treatments 4 or 5 days a week, eating this crazy diet. So then in the summer, actually, when the photo of him in the woods there, he said to me, look, the cancer's gone. We've been doing this thing for, it was 2016, so it was like 2 years. He'd been doing this for 2 years, and he said, I can't do it anymore. And I can definitely say he was showing signs of PTSD. He had been fighting so hard, and he was exhausted. And I said, if we stop the treatments, the cancer might come back. He didn't think it would. He thought he was cured, and there were no signs of it. So, unfortunately, it eventually we had some bad news. But I just want to pause and, you know, and I'm going to just read some words from St. Paul about suffering and the meaning of suffering in our lives. It is being granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share his sufferings, becoming like him in death. Do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? We were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. For if we have been united with him in death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that in everything God works for the good, even with childhood brain cancer, for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And partly we're conformed to the image of the Son through our suffering, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified. And we're glorified through our baptism. For as many of you who were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. In November of 2016, we did an MRI, and it showed that there were 4 tumors back. And I knew at this point that we were nearing the end. I knew that he had no fight left in him. He was exhausted. You can see in the photo here, he was exhausted. So I went to the school where Coco was going, St. Demetrius School, right next to the church. And Lily Hordienko was there. It was her first year. I hadn't even met her yet as the principal. And I told her what our family was going through, that Kai's cancer had come back, and, we were facing a very grim situation. And if you know Lily, she has a really big heart, and, she gave me a big hug, and she said, we're going to do something for your family. So she went to Yavir, the dance troupe that Coco had been dancing in. She went to the church, St. Demetrius and Father John, and they got some funds together, and they sent us to Niagara Falls. And it was our last time together as a family. And we had a great trip together. And you can see in the main photo, Kai's not smiling, but in the photo on the upper corner there, he is smiling. There were laughs, there were smiles, there was a lot of love together at that point. At that time, Kai had to be in a wheelchair because his legs stopped working, and the cancer was growing into his spinal cord. And so he was losing dexterity in his hands, and he couldn't play video games anymore. And I said, aren't you angry that you can't play? I'd be angry with God that I couldn't play video games. That's me, right? Mr. Hothead. And Kai's response, Kai, Mr. Cool, Deep Waters, just said, no, now you have to play for me, Dad. Bear each other's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ, which is the law of love. That's what it is. Every night, Kai and I would pray together. We would say the Our Father. We would pray Psalm 23. We were reading Tolkien and watching Tolkien. We love Tolkien. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. The end? No. The journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it, white shores, and beyond a far green country under a swift sunrise. And that's from Tolkien. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with sighs too deep for words, and he who searches the hearts of men knows what is the mind of Christ, what the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Kai passed away at home in his sleep on January the 12th, 2017. And he's actually buried at the cemetery at St. Elias. Our dog Susie just passed away a few weeks ago too, so some of her ashes are sprinkled there. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword or even cancer? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. None of us lives to himself, and none of us dies to himself. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and of the living. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, that you should follow in his steps, that we may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that, if possible, we may attain the resurrection from the dead. I am so confident that I will see Kai again at the resurrection. Lo, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy victory? O death, where is thy sting? Love never ends. My love for Kai will never end, for love is stronger than death. I love you, Bubba. I'm just sort of at the end of the story here, but I just, and you can imagine, it, in some ways, the grief gets easier, but it's been now 7 years since Kai died, and I still, especially on the anniversary of his death, and we're coming to his birthday in a few weeks, it'll be difficult. But I also wanted to just mention these few events that happened, and not sort of boasting about them, but to show that life has connectivity to it, even in death, where we think it's like, no, it's the end. It's like everything has fallen apart. Even in death, life has meaning. The two photos here of the that are on top, Christ is risen. So March 29, Lent 2017, 2 months after Kai died. So the photo on the top left there is the icon that is at Golgotha in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the icon is showing Christ when he's died on the cross. And you can see that his side is being pierced, his eyes are closed. On March 29th, just a couple of months after Kai died, the other photo is showing that the eyes on the icon opened. And the photo was taken by a Greek Orthodox priest who was there. There were witnesses who witnessed this. It was 2 weeks before the resurrection. And to me, you could think, oh, this is a bizarre kind of, Eastern thing that eyes are opening on an icon. But it's showing that he's alive. It's showing that he is still alive. And it's a miracle, right? So this was really touching for me, especially after Kai died. On the 1-year anniversary, after Kai's death, on the day to his death. We went out to the cemetery, we saw him, and then we were like, what should we do? And we heard there was a tribute concert for Gordon Lightfoot. Kai loved Gordon Lightfoot, and Leonard Cohen were Kai's two favorite singers. And we went to this tribute concert. Coco and I went with our friend Larissa, and Coco was definitely the youngest person in the audience there. And the lights come on halfway through this tribute concert, and the manager came over to us, and she just pointed down the room. She says, "He's over there." And we went over, and we got to meet Kai's hero on the anniversary of his death. So it was really meaningful. It was a really meaningful moment for us. And it was sort of like Kai's looking down on us, and he arranged this for us. The last thing I want to mention is the larger photo that's on the right. Father Peter and I led another pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 2018. So it's about a year and a half after Kai died. When we went back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I was drawn, like a magnet is pulling me up those stairs. Like it was like suddenly it was an escalator, and I was just like floating up the stairs, and I was drawn right over to where the altar is of the crucifixion, and you can see through the plexiglass here that the rock outcropping is still there, right? Like they show the hill, and on the side of the altar where the red arrow is, there's an inscription in Greek, and it's a passage from Scripture about the crucifixion. The first word is K-A-I, is Kai's name. He was right there. So Kai, the Holy Spirit, somebody's pulling me over there to say, look, he's here. He's here with us. So it was really, even in death, life has meaning. Even in death, there is purpose and connection, and life doesn't end. Death is not the end. So Christ is risen. Christos voskres. We're still in the Paschal season. Christos anesti. Alistos anesti. Christ is risen. Truly he is risen. And this is not the end. I will, like I said, do some more videos. And I put this icon in. I love this icon. And then I didn't notice him when I chose it. But there's that guy looks like Kai, right? So he's on the side there. That's why I put his name on there. And it's like Jesus is really looking at that kid. And even like the guy beside him with the beard, the white beard, he's like, hey, kid, why are you butting in line here? Right. So Kai's there. He's with Jesus. And like I said, I know, love never ends. As St. Paul says, love never ends. And it's love that is pulling us to the eschaton. Love is pulling us to Christ and all of the saints who are living in Christ at the eschaton. And I will see my son again. I know it's not the end. So thank you all for staying here and enduring this time. I know it's been a while, but it's a big story, and I didn't want to chop it up. Thank you for listening to this. And like I said, I'll do a couple of other follow-up videos on why orthodoxy. It'll be more theological, but also dealing with this issue. Like it just came up while I was preparing for this one. I realized this is really that theodicy, God is evil, giving kids brain cancer and all of that. So we'll talk about all that stuff too. So again, thank you very much. And please like and share and all that stuff. And we'll hopefully see all you guys soon. So take care. Shalom lachem.